don't feel bad about taking time for yourself. Honestly,
That is a really good one.
there's so much guilt that comes with taking time for yourself.
Just do it anyways, even if you feel
Do
guilty.
it anyway, if you feel, even if you feel, because trust me, I felt guilty when I left, but then I got there, I was like, I'm not guilty anymore. Like I'm bringing back the best version of me. That's what they need.
Breaking rules is how we grow. No limits, no
Allison,
fear.
thank you so much for being on Building Iconic today. You have an amazing career and accomplishments, and I'm so excited to have you share what you've learned over the time of your career. I know that you've worked on some top tech companies from the design perspective, Frog, Hot Studio, SAP, and most recently written your own book, which we'll talk about, and also have started up your own company and community called 4050, which we'll also talk about. But tell us a little bit about Allison. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here and be in conversation with you. Um, a little bit about me. Let's see. I am a born and raised New Yorker, which I think New York City girly. So I feel like that says a lot about me. But there's not that many of us that could say that we were born and raised in the city. I feel like that was really foundational to who I am. I have been working in design and tech for the entirety of my career. I studied fine art, but I ended up fine art and art history. But I ended up needing a job out of college. So I got kind of taken away, carried away, rode the dot-com wave, essentially. I learned how to code. I became a developer. I moved into, I wanted to understand more of like the end-to-end process. So I moved into production, program management, project management. But consistently being in the world of, well, of design, capital D design, so human-centered design, really learning more about the process of what it means to consider the human in the products we build. So I worked in consulting for the first half of my career with a ton of clients, leading program management, engagement strategy, operations at some storied firms that you listed, and the second half of my career I moved inside of tech, where I was taking all of those learnings and leading design operations and strategy, just to figure out essentially how to take all of the designers that were brought into tech, and how best to infuse design into the companies. So design can be lowercase d, which is a lot of what you would consider design, like visual design, the pixel polish pushing and all of those things around that. But the capital D design is really so much about transformation and how companies function. And so how we're thinking about not just considering the human experience in outside for our products, but how we're considering the human experience inside. So that has been my work in organizations. And then in the process of that, over the last 5 years, I've been focused on building out this platform for women in midlife, 40/50, and in the last 2 years, writing a book about all of it. So that's what's just launched into the world. Sentito, my book.
You have an amazing track record, and you really do. And when I first met you and you were talking to me about 40/50, I loved just the idea behind what you were building. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes. So 40/50, the genesis of 40/50 started during COVID with my childhood friend. Well, actually, all of my childhood friends who I grew up with, we all convened on that Marco Polo app that was big at the time, that sort of async video chat. And there was a moment when we all recognized, there was like five of us on there, that there was so much more we were going through than just dealing with the pandemic. We were dealing with our aging parents. We were dealing with kids going to college, little kids, jobs, our bodies, our relationships, all of the things. And we really only had each other to talk to and like get information around these things. What's now being called these whisper networks, which is really interesting, right? It's like this notion that it's not a notion, the very real reality that women just trust their circle of people, and then whoever their circle of people trust, that's how that network, that we just find the information we need. So my partner, co-founder Delia, and I at some point were like, why doesn't this exist in the world for other women? Like this, or like, how can we expand this network to be, like there is a trusted source of women and doctors that we've curated to provide this information around health and well-being for midlife women. So that's what's been growing for the last, I'd say, slowly growing, slow marketing, slow all of it. We've experimented on a variety of different formats. And most recently in the last 2 years, moved over to Substack, which has been quite successful, of just like putting out content, writing. I do a lot of writing, sharing women's stories. We have guidance around health and well-being. So the core piece of that is providing information in story and emotion in fact. So how do we meet women where they are and not scare them with all of the statistics and all the things we need to know about taking care of ourselves, because we know that women take care of themselves last after the family pet. And how can we make it less scary by saying other women are having these experiences too? Here's their stories. They're beautiful. And if you give a woman 5 minutes, she will tell you a story. So that's been Substack, which has been growing really well. And then in the last 2 months, we've moved over to a social health platform, which has always been the intention, a community platform where we can gather, guide, and talk. So we gather on different, for different meetings and different sessions and different workshops. We just talk in the space and share information. And then the guidance is around all of the different experts that we bring onto the platform to talk to women about, of things from like soft power to menopause.
Which we all need if you're a certain age to know about.
Right.
I feel like, it's as I'm aging, you come to terms with the idea that like at first, the first phase of your life, you're kind of like invincible. And then the next phase of your life, you come to realization of like, oh, it does end. And in that it does end, you start to be like, oh crap, I better fit everything in. Like there's almost like this like
Right. Yeah. No, this is actually now or never time.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. The first phase is awesome. You're like, oh, I am invincible. I could do whatever I want. And then you like wake up one day, you're like, oh, my back kind of hurts because I worked out.
Right. Why are my legs still sore?
Yeah.
I work out.
Doesn't recover the same. Well, so with building, and you're still applying yourself other places right now. You're not just building up 40, 50. Right. So tell us about the other part of your career right now.
Yeah, I am. There's a lot of things going on right now. So the book is a big part of my career right now. I'm working on really pushing that out and doing a lot more speaking engagements around universities and in companies, because there's a lot to leverage on both sides of that coin for students who are getting ready to come into this professional world, to people who are actually in it, from starting out to leaders. I'm also a consultant, so I work with companies to, on whatever specific problem that they're looking to help in solving. So that could be, filling in for somebody. I was a managing director for a company for 8 months, for a design company for 8 months, when somebody was out on maternity leave, which is literally like soup to nuts of running the company. To working with organizations on thinking about organizational design and how they want to, if they want to restructure or transition or infuse the company with more strategic thinking / applying my experience around strategy to product design and customer experience. And then the third piece that I'm working on right now, I guess it's like the fourth, is I'm getting my master's in foresight. So I'm studying the future, which is actually really comforting right now for me, particularly being able to ground myself in like the context of the past and like having broader perspective about the future. And I really leverage those tools to apply to all of the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, and this comes back to, we had a pre-conversation before we started recording, but wow, like how are you doing all of that? I want to dive into each thing. It's incredible that you're able to do all these things, and I would love to hear more about what you're doing with your speaking engagements. What are the top like highlights or strategies or philosophies that you're teaching there?
Um, it varies, but I'm trying to really pull the thread out of, what we talked about a little bit earlier in terms of what the thesis of my book is, and that organic intelligence is something that is undervalued, aka street smarts, lived experience from our childhood, essentially. I'd say it's sub 18 years. The things that we glean from just living, and how we can leverage a lot of those, and how we can start to feel like those instincts are superpowers instead of feeling this need to constantly, and I have nothing against academia. I went to college. I'm getting a master's right now, right? But this need, especially as women, to constantly prove ourselves through additional accolades when it's actually like maybe not totally necessary. And how do we apply a lot of those skill sets to leadership? And I don't mean leadership in terms of like you need to be at like a VP, C level, whatever. How we show up for each other, how we show up is with one another, how do we care for each other, how we create these kind of spaces that are safe and trusted. And that to me is how leaders really show up, even if you're an individual contributor and you're starting out early in your career, if you're, like approaching things with curiosity and, being really thoughtful and intentional and mindful of the spaces that you're in, we can actually have impact on belonging. And I believe that is more important now than ever, especially as we're moving towards like the age of machines. How is the human factor really being infused into the work that we're doing if you're coming out of college? Or maybe I'm also doing talks in spaces just for high school kids going into the world, to being in corporate environments. How are we designing those spaces for not just each other, but the end result is going to be in the products we put in the world.
And can you give us an example of leveraging your 18-year-old self experiences and how that can look into your career as like a 40 or 50-year-old?
Yeah. When people ask me this question, I really like to read a small thing from the book, which was what started the entire book. So I was really frustrated at work one day, and I texted my same group chat of like my OG girls. I wrote, working on a book idea featuring chapters such as leadership lessons from Cheer, how to channel Anna Delvey to get what you want, strategy, aka barrio chess. So barrio chess is like the chess that you play in the parks in the city, right? Clockers, the movie Clockers. Bochinche, which is gossip in Puerto Rican Spanish, and like clubbing but without the fun. Send title thoughts. So I and then this whole turned into essentially what is now the book, because I started to recognize, especially in the last one, like clubbing like clubbing without the fun. It sounds awful, but I felt like so much. And I went to the clubs all the time when I was growing up in the city, and it was always an unsafe space, but it was the most fun, unsafe space for women. But we knew to go together. We knew to stay together. We had the best time. You just dance in these circles. I'm sure you're nodding your head. You're like,
oh yeah,
yep.
No,
Yeah,
I know.
so much fun. But you also know what it feels like to be a woman in those spaces, that like you got to have awareness. And you got to look out for each other. That's the other, like the sisterhood piece that I talk about in the book too. So sisterhood. So anyway, being in corporate spaces, all of a sudden, the two things that were so clear to me that disappeared, well, not disappeared. The two things that were so clear to me is that a lot of times those boardrooms, those conference rooms felt like clubbing without the fun. Like it felt like me in a space with a lot of people who were not like me, with mostly men, that felt, and people would say weird things all the time. You know, you're nodding your head because I know you know too, right? I feel like every single woman could say, yep. And especially like, you know, in my generation where those things were just perfectly fine to say in front of a woman and be like, well, that felt weird, right? And then being like, that felt weird and not trusting myself enough to know that it was weird, but also knowing I couldn't really do anything about it, you know? But, and then on the sisterhood side of things, you know, also from my younger self, like having sisters that like, you know, chosen family of sisters that always looked out for each other. And everywhere we went, we were like, you know, made sure everybody was safe and okay. And we trusted and everything. We learned so much from that family. And then when you get into these spaces, that doesn't exist anymore. Like there's so few of us women, especially women of color, that like everyone's fighting for their place. So there is like the chapter's called Sisterhood with a question mark, because there are points in our life and in our, you know, whenever that might be, that most, you know, I think many women have close relationships with each other and look out for each other. And then you get into these spaces where like women are not looking out for each other. And it feels so terrible. You know, it's like, wait, I thought we were supposed to have each other's backs. Like that's supposed to be the language here. Like there's a handful of us. We got to look out for each other. So to answer your question, like a lot of those lessons, those core lessons of even being, you know, navigating the subway at 14 years old at 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to get home from the clubs was like, I got to figure out how to do this so I'm safe. And it's like, to me, it's very one to one, those lessons.
It's so fascinating because I think that in that preparation phase when you're growing up and you feel that camaraderie with other women, and then you go into the workplace and there is that transition, there is a lot of distrust in yourself, a lot of imposter syndrome. You're like, oh, is that me? Like, is that how is it because I'm taking it wrong? And so it does have that shift. And in my career, after Airbnb, I left there feeling like women just weren't represented as they should be. And so I actually left there and I made Babco and I named it Badass Bitches for that
I
reason.
love that so much.
I was like, I'm going to just reclaim like all of my power, like all of it. I'm just going to take it back and put it in my company.
Amazing. Amazing. I love that so much. I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, that's what it's meant to be. It's meant to reclaim that power. So tell us, like, what are your top like strategies and philosophies that you teach about, I would say, let's focus on design and building up companies to be iconic. I'm sure there's certain things that you look at that you've learned over time being as part of tech and design. What are like the top three things that you've learned that apply to maybe all of the spaces that you're thinking about?
Top three things. So let's see. One of the top things I've learned is that, and these might be all interrelated, is that when I come into a company, because oftentimes you know, the role I play is multifaceted. And the designer's role is to go through this process, a very like design process, like discovery, distillation, design, development. In my book, I kind of rename that wander, test, explore, and emerge. So, because that has been a process that I've just naturally did throughout the course of my life and leading with that wandering and curiosity. So when I come into an organization, and in general, I think that there was a lot to learn. And so we need to come in really curious and listen to learn. at times there was a time when somebody taught me about like the multiple ways that people listen, and listening to learn is the most like altruistic version of yourself that you could be, instead of like listening to wait to talk or to interject or not listening at all. But I think going through that process, you start to really identify signal to noise if you can, right? You really need to start. That's the sense making piece. It's like over time, patterns always emerge if you're paying attention. And once you identify those patterns, you can really begin to distill out what might be happening within a system. So I think pretty broadly, I do a lot of like systems thinking. And that's the like, all right, how are we thinking about this broader ecosystem of an organization, which is organisms, humans, and how do we identify the signal to noise? I also leverage a lot of living systems in my teachings. I really learn a ton from nature. And when I was younger, I lived in Puerto Rico for many years, and I spent a lot of time like in the rainforest or just wandering, like, the jungle essentially. And now I live in the country or in the woods. But, and even learning from like how a city functions, I'm thinking about these living systems and how they're also directly applicable to our organizations. So what are the signals that we can identify and those patterns? And then those patterns tend to reveal the things that might be happening that are right and the things that might be happening that are wrong. The other thing that is really important is identifying the skeptics. Because when you come in doing this type of work, you're inherently, I think you're creating a lot of anxiety with people, because if you're coming in to they think, you're a change agent, you're coming in to change something, you're there to help, even if it's there to help. Transformation is like a ridiculous word that's used all the time. It's nearly impossible to transform something, and that takes years. But you're there to change something. So there's a lot of friction there. So you really need, it's not just the listening to learn, but having the empathy to understand like the anxiety around that within people. Everybody cares so much about what it is that how it affects them. So identifying the skeptics and figuring out ways to best learn from them and work with them. And build relationships and build trust, which is super foundational. And that takes time. That takes a lot of time. And then the last thing I'd say is like, because things take so much time, these types of things are, a process. I like to think to reference the El Yunque in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria was decimated. Nothing was left. And I would look at pictures of that and just feel so gutted. How could this possibly re-emerge? But over time, it did, right? And it's like you go there now and it looks like that didn't happen. Just like with fires or, like decimated, but nature finds a way to work with each other, this mutualistic space where it figures out how to re-emerge stronger. So I think leveraging those ideas is really helping people understand that this is a process, and how do I communicate best that process, and what are the different levers for communicating that process and taking people on that journey of, like, they say, like, it's like effective 7 times the effective frequency model, which is like it takes 7 times for somebody to actually like absorb something. It's a marketing term, but it's true. You have to just kind of repeat the same things over and over again. And so much of the work that I do is like rinse, wash, repeat, and like keep doing it. It's almost like parenting. You're like, I told you this 100 times. Okay, let's do it again.
There's so many similarities between parenting and running a company.
Totally. And I'm gonna keep smiling.
There's nothing wrong here. Yeah, I would love to dive into, when you are going into a company and you're looking for that company to be the most successful version of itself, what would you say are the philosophies and strategies that are working that you would say, like, as a blanket, like, what should other people think about as they're building their companies, either from the ground up or looking to correct their companies aren't going the way that they would like? What would you say to them?
Well, first thing I probably wouldn't say to them is so much of this is, I mean, everybody knows this, but people don't actually pay attention to it. It's like almost entirely cultural. And so if you're not considerate of your DNA, all these companies get built on what the founder is like, and right, often what the initial like mission and principle and how they set up their boards, and that is the culture that becomes the DNA. And so it really depends. Every company is different. I always say, like, when I was younger and I would change jobs and be like, it's going to be so much better. And then I'm like, well, it's actually not. Like, every company is dysfunctional. It's just like the flavor of dysfunction you're comfortable with. So in that process that I talked about before, that's a lot of like uncovering that dysfunction. I would say though that so many of the things like in this, like, it sounds very process driven, but I feel as though what people forget is when leaders, when they're running companies, is like, people need to feel joy. They need to be able to play. They need to be able to get weird. They need to like, and it's not about, it's not just about like retreats and doing silly things. It's like you can find those, if you enable those, the space for that, a lot of beautiful things can emerge. And so I think when companies are so focused on the bottom line, I was just saying this to my daughter, my older daughter, who's working at this cafe, and they just told her that she's living in North Carolina. They told her that she can't take any time off for the holidays. And she was like, what? I've been working so hard and this is a ridiculous job, but like, it's a job that you do. Service industry is super important, especially at any point in anybody's life. But she's like, I give this place so much of my time and my energy, and now they're telling me I can't go home for Christmas, like for the holidays. And I was like, who says that? And then she got all like, well, I don't want you to come down on me for working a barista job. I was like, no, I was not going to do that. What I was going to say to you was, I don't care if you're working at Google. Like, if someone isn't treating you well, then they don't deserve you. And I know that feels like counterintuitive to what we've been taught, but at the end of the day, like, and those people are so short-sighted, because what's going to happen is she'll quit so she can come home for the holidays, for God's sakes, and they're going to lose an amazing employee. And then what they're going to do is they're going to replace her, and they're going to have to train that person. That person might not even be as good. And with bigger companies, you end up spending so much more to bring somebody new on, rather than like investing in the people that you have. So what does it take to invest in your people, truly? And I know that sorry, I'm rambling, but I know that there's like all of this backlash, which is so upsetting, around like DEI and belonging and any kind of woke language that we had. And like, so much of that was performative anyway, but what we're removing with the anxiety around that is the human factor. Like, I would tell companies, and I don't care if it feels too soft and smushy or feminine, that you have to invest in your people. So what does that mean? What does that look like? And it looks different for every company. And I can give you processes and frameworks and all kinds of stuff that I've learned over the course of my career and academic, blah, blah, blah. But like, at the end of the day, if your culture eats strategy for breakfast, then what's the purpose?
Yeah, I love just the focus on the culture piece, because it is so important. And I think that when you're looking at a company, I think it's one of the things that you're like, oh, we'll just make it profitable. But the success of the company is truly defined by its people. And so if the people can't get their jobs done, if they're not satisfied, if they're rooting against you even, I think you mentioned, trying to find the people who are, not going in the direction of the rest of the company, right? Like, those people exist in your company, and it's like your job to make sure that they're all moving in the direction of the vision. They're all moving in the direction of the mission. And I think those are like the root of that is it's one of the things that some folks forget about as they're building up the company. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to build this thing, but it's like, who's going to help me build it? And
Right.
how do I make sure those people align to what I see
Yeah.
is huge.
Totally. And what can I do to support them so that if you, and when you build a culture that is supportive, um, you have people who will really go all out for you. Like they'll fully invest for you. And like they'll believe in it too.
Yeah. At Airbnb, we did this like culture fit interview where everyone had to do the culture fit interview. And you had to make sure that you meet the culture. You kind of rolled your eyes there, so I want to know more about that. But I will say that one of the things I really took away from that, not just the culture fit interview, but the ability for the company to focus everyone on one thing. And I called it drinking the Kool-Aid because from day one, I was in there drinking the Airbnb Kool-Aid. I was
Oh,
like,
the whole Snow White thing. Everybody drink that Kool-Aid, even if they weren't there.
they're still drinking it. I'm still like, oh, Airbnb.
No, it's great.
But I just truly loved working there. And I do think that they did a great job of creating and manifesting the culture of it, even if it went astray sometimes, I will say. It didn't always map. But I think that like we had the core values, the principles and philosophy of the company, the vision, all of it was so clear that everyone could see the direction of the North Star. Not just the CEO, but like it was so strong. It was like we were all breathing it. It was like we were cults almost. Like we're all like, oh my God, belong anywhere. And we're like all floating into the same direction. And the amount of belief, because like the CEO can hold a belief, but if everyone believes it that's working on it, that's what you want.
100%. 100%. I mean, I think the vision, I have been so many places that did not have a clear vision. That vision is critical because everything trickles down from that. And whatever that vision might be, but it's so important for people to align to that. I will say that the reason why I rolled my eyes is because I believe that some of that, like cultural fit interviews were pretty like, what's the veiled, that made certain places extremely exclusive, right? So it's like, and you don't know what they were actually, it's so amorphous. What are they actually looking for in those culture fit interviews? But when culture is really important and like, Airbnb sounds like they were doing it, they've been doing it right. Then it's an incredible thing. So you do drink that Kool-Aid. And that's what I was saying. It's like I had something similar at Frog, where I was for 6 years. And I don't think the DNA of that company, and by the time I got there, the founder had already sold it and left, but the DNA was still there from him. And it changed a lot. And it's certainly, I don't think the same anymore, but he did instill this culture of like ridiculously smart people, experimentation, fun, and iteration. So and people naturally gravitated towards that space. And to bring somebody into the company, like you were saying with Airbnb, it was like such a high bar. You had such a high bar. So you just had the most ridiculously talented people that just loved working with each other. I'd say like over time, because that was infused into the DNA, it was great. And so we had great spaces and amazing teams. But we kind of banded together because the corporate infrastructure changed and it didn't feel as rich as it had. But because we were all there as individuals, we were able to create these different like pods of teams and projects and stuff to keep doing that, kind of like keep doing what the founder had built the company on.
Was there a new leader in this team now that was like holding up the standards?
It was just broad. But Prague was like, yes, there was a chief creative officer, and they always brought in great chief creative officers when I was there that I really liked. And yeah, they generally brought in good people on the leadership teams. That allowed space for that. But they weren't involved in the day to day, and they were probably dealing with all the chaos of the politics, clearly, like that's what they were doing. But they also stayed involved, some of them in the work, which was really so supportive and nice to be around. Is like, I know that like this guy who's the chief creative officer of this company is still going to like show up with me at a biz dev or a really important presentation, and he'll have worked with us as a team to make sure he feels really confident and giving us feedback. Like all of those things, the layers didn't feel so removed.
I feel like I need to just talk a little bit about the culture fit interview at Airbnb, because I don't want people to take away that it was failed. And I think there's a way to do it right. Speaking of culture, to build up the right culture in a company. And the thing that I think Airbnb did really well was that they started the culture fit interviews from a place of knowing what the core values of the company were. So the culture fit interviews were all about making sure that that person mapped up into the values that we were looking for at Airbnb. And I think in general, like even with a family, like at the time I worked there, we thought of Airbnb as like, that's your air fam. You're coming in, you're going to be part of this vision, part of this mission, you'll be part of this family, but we want to make sure that you believe the things we believe first. And I think that's so important, because what you don't want is someone to come into your company who doesn't believe the way that you believe. And I think that's what they were looking for. They're like, we want to make sure that you're really talented, but also that you're going to believe in this vision, this mission, and in that belief will help us get there.
Yeah. And those values, I think having values as a company is not that many do. Like even as an individual, I think a lot about my own personal values, and that's a really important point that you're making, is like, how do you align values if a value system with a company? So most companies don't put their values out there, but some companies do. And so it's like, is there alignment there? Because it's not just about like, do you fit into the company? Does the company fit into you? I think like we need to flip that script a little bit too. It's like, make sure, and that's what I was saying to my daughter, like, no, this isn't like, oh, they made me feel so bad, blah, blah, blah. What do I do to make them feel to be better? It's like, no, they made you feel bad. They shouldn't, right? That's not like, okay. So how do it's the two sides of like, does the company's values fit into you, and do you fit into them?
You should tell your daughter to look at In-N-Out Burger. That's my.
That's only on the West Coast.
Oh no! Oh man, that's too bad. Maybe Starbucks. I've heard good things about them.
They do have health benefits, or maybe not anymore.
I think they still.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, tell us about your book, a little more about your book, and I know that you talked a little bit about where it came from, and why you started the book. And now show us the book, like your physical book. You have a physical book.
Physical book.
There it is.
It's Finding Sense and Purpose in Design Leadership. Yeah, it's MIT Press. It's been out for 2 weeks. You can buy it wherever you buy books. Thank you. The book is, so, the last couple of years I've been on a bit of a like soul searching mission. I've been doing a lot of personal work, a lot of somatic work. I moved from New York City into the woods. And I've been trying to make sense of my own career and what I'm doing with 40/50, the experiences I've had in my career that were very less than ideal. And so when I started Sentido, it was a different book than what it turned out to be. When I started it, I wanted it to feel like authentically me. It needed to feel like a Nuyorican, like gritty, super like real talker / professional. So that part to me was always important, and they were very, very supportive in that throughout. But I think what ended up it ended up being, through the memoir piece of it, was kind of taking the reader along on my own personal and professional journey of like finding my own self and purpose up to this point. So how did I get from, there to here? And there's a lot of emotion in it. There's a lot of vulnerability in it, and it really, it gives people real guidance, real frameworks, real provocations, real, value driven stuff. But it also, I hope, prompts people to look within, and to not separate ourselves so much from whatever we've been told that we should separate ourselves from. And again, like, don't bring your whole self to work. Like, nobody needs to see that, but like, bring, do the work so that you feel like a whole person, and that in bringing the best version of yourself, you're not really like tampering down anything or swallowing anything that feels bad. So how can we show up for each other, which is also really important, is like that provocation against around like sisterhood ? And just do better. And where can we meet? Where can we continue to like emerge? Or where can we emerge, especially in these times?
So how would you say to bring your best self to work every day?
How would you say to bring your best self? In the book, I have a play on the radical candor quadrants, because I had problems with radical candor. I felt like it was very top down. It wasn't, there's plenty of people who can't actually do that. They just sort of have to swallow a lot of that like radical candor coming at them. And so I think the bringing myself into this book, this like Nuyorican city girl, like, and to work, is what I learned over time is I can be authentically me with some polish. I don't have to, like, I talk about how to professionally read a colleague, so I don't need to do it like I did in high school. Like, how do I come really honest with somebody in a way that the candor doesn't feel like I'm coming at somebody, but it feels like I'm learning and they're learning, and I've found that over time that always makes the relationship better. I've never had that experience where I figured out how to, like, where I've done that with, tried to build those relationships mostly like with other women, that it hasn't netted out super positive for our relationship and that growth. And so I lost my train of thought. Wait, what was the question again?
It's okay. I was trying to think, how do you bring your best
Oh, yes,
self?
yes. Sorry. Yeah. So I think that there are ways to, you have to do your own work of understanding what parts of you that you don't want to get rid of or lose, and how you can best show up for that. So I feel like there's just so much of that, and again, authenticity is an overused word, but I think that to authentically show up is to find the balance between being who you're comfortable being, and also understanding that you're in an environment that you need to like be like representational of like some sort of level of professionalism. And, I had a conversation recently with a young woman, just recently, like 7 months into her first job out of college. And she was already like, I'm ready for the next thing. And, but also like, I'm like really loud in these meetings oftentimes where I'm saying things that people maybe rub people the wrong way. And I was like, I've been there, but and you shouldn't lose that edge, but you probably need to consider like, what is your intended outcome? What is your intention? And pause pause around like what is the purpose. So whenever you feel reactive around a thing, like try and be a little self-reflective and say, all right, how can I sort of shift this into, and it's like there is a lot of politics around it. Not, like there's no sugarcoating that. It is work, you know? But we have to, if you think about the ways that you could be authentically yourself while also knowing the context of what you're in, I think that balance is hard to strike, but over time that muscle builds, it gets a lot stronger.
Yeah, I think that those are things that I'm constantly thinking about myself. And one of the things that I actually worked at In-N-Out Burger.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. One of the things the store manager that I worked for always focused on, he was like, as soon as you cross this line, your personal shit is left at the door. Like this line, you're walking in, it's like you're putting on your hat, you're putting on your apron. And right now it's about everyone else. It's about the customer, and it's not about the stuff that's going on in your personal life. And so, speaking to the, before you're 18, that was me before 18, I took that away. And it was one of the things that I learned the first part of like how to put on a professional face. It's like the professional me and like who I'm showing up professionally might very well be different than who I'm showing up personally. It's not that it's not authentic, but it's a different person. And I think, brands do this too. And I always tell my kids, you're building up your personal brand. Every second you're talking with someone, that's your brand. And so when you're thinking about your brand, it does come from a space of like, I better think about it. I better be, I'm not going to go, I might not feel like doing my hair one day, but you best believe I'm going to do my hair if I'm going to be in front of people.
Right.
So you have to kind of override sometimes some stuff that might be going on internally. For me, this is what I think is you have to override something that might be going on internally to show up as your best self, because you want to move, you have a goal in mind of your personal brand, who you want to be. And to me, I'm like, I want to show up as much as possible as that person. And that might mean I'm going to bypass feeling sad or angry, or maybe overly excited. Because sometimes I'm like giddy and I'm like, oh, I'm going to hold that back just a little bit, So I think that those for me, like showing up as my best self, I like have a vision of who she is. And I map to that vision 24/7 as much as possible. Even on the days where I don't have time, I'm like, oh, I don't have time. Like the best me, I'm like, my hair's done, my lipstick's on, my, I look a certain way. I feel a certain way inside. I'm wearing a certain outfit. But I'm like, I'm going to be that person as much as possible.
Yeah. I really love that framing is, you are really, and at the end of the day, the only thing you own, unless you have your own company, is that personal brand, is your experience, your resume, and your personal brand. That's the thing that people remember, and that's what you carry with you, because companies come and go. They can let you go even if you've been there 20 years. So I really like that positioning is like, what is, and that is additionally like you're kind of like future casting a little bit and thinking like, how do I want to build my brand? What do I want to be known for? Or how do I want to be seen? I think that's also, it's a really, really amazing thing to be sharing out into the world. It's not something that I think young people think about so much, especially now when they're going in and they're like speaking their minds and just expecting the next like salary and promotion bump. It's like, okay, let's talk about like how this process works. Really, again, work is work.
It's not, I think there's this thought with younger folks is like, work should always be fun, or I should always be doing things that I want to be doing. And that's just, maybe there's a version of life that is what happens. But even if you're a YouTube influencer, you're still doing things that you don't always want to do. And so that's just part of life. We know as mothers, even that you're going to do things that you don't want to do, but you have to. And part of work is that. And part of building a company is that. I'm sure But I think that with owning your own thing, you get to do more of the things that you enjoy
Right. Right.
and less of the things that you don't.
Yes, yes, for sure. And that's where, you have yeah, you have more power over those things. But it's truly, yeah, it is work at the end of the day. At Frog, when I would, build teams, I was always building teams and trying to put together like the right people for the right kind of work that we would get in. And there would be oftentimes, a good amount of hemming and hawing around whatever it was that came in that wasn't super sexy. And I was like, you know what? I know that you came here thinking like everything was going to be like this project or this project that's like all like sexy, glamorous, this whatever, like feels so exciting. But the reality is, it's like those are portfolio projects and like most of the work is for the books. So you have to find what's interesting in this. What are you going to bring that is going to make this more interesting for you? And therefore will be more interesting ultimately because then we'll be doing better work, there'll be a better outcomes. But that takes time that takes time to get to as well. I think a lot of people, they're in the early part of their career are really starry-eyed about the world and work and what they wanted to do, and that's natural. Like I feel the unfortunate reality is a lot of these things end up just beating you down.
It's true. One thing I will say is that like this sounds crazy, but in my vision, when I hold a vision for myself, my brand or whatever, or my company, through the first phase of my life, I had this very strong vision of things that I wanted to achieve. And I will just say, like, keep dreaming big. Like, I wish, like, I know I set a whole bunch of stuff in motion that I achieved. And I'm like, oh, I achieved those things. But I wish I achieved more. And I know that sounds so silly because I'm very accomplished. And I know this. And I know that from the outside, people might be, what is she talking about? But I didn't know how much stuff to put in my dream because I didn't have access to it. I didn't see it enough, and I didn't know that there was more to it. And I'm not just talking about, success and in that way, but, visualizing myself relaxing even, like knowing that there's this space for me to like enjoy life and have certain successes and feel accomplished, and like that feeling of accomplishment, just putting more into that vision and that future space, and like really thinking through like, how do I want to feel? How do I want it to look? And I think I did a really great job. I'm not saying I didn't. I know objectively I did. But if I could go back and do it again, I would add some things.
That's interesting. What do you feel like is missing?
I don't feel like anything is necessarily missing. It's more of the next phase of me is looking for this balance of getting things accomplished, but also enjoying what I've built. So this enjoyment of the build. And like, when do you stop building versus when do you enjoy? And I think that some people might call enjoyment retirement, but I'm not looking for retirement. I'm looking for truly, not that I don't enjoy my life. I fully embrace and enjoy my life, but there's a lot of go. And there's a lot of still, I'm building. And there's not a lot of like, stop and look at what you've built, which I try to do more and more. But I would say like, in college, and when I worked at In-N-Out Burger as a store manager, like I really focused on work. And I was like, I'm not going to party. I'm not going to be a socialite. Like these things are not what I'm doing. I'm really building up over here. Like, so y'all do that. I'm going to go build my career. And in doing that, I think what I left on the table was a little bit of my my relationships with others, And so even now I'm looking at that going, who can be my long-term friends? And that's like a focus right now for me. That wasn't a focus in the beginning of my career, or in the beginning of my life even. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I will say that when I the data that I've extracted from people joining the 40/50 community, women joining the community, is so much of what they're looking for is the top three areas were career, purpose, and relationships, friendships, community. And so I think it's also natural, it has been natural at this point for a lot of women and men too, at this point in life, to feel like they've built so much and there's parts of their life that they neglected, but not in a bad way, but it's like in the finding the balance of the enjoyment versus the just like ambition.
yeah. And I think I had this analogy of, you think about the three little pigs, and the three little pigs built their houses, right? The first one built it out of straw, and the next one out of sticks, and the next one out of bricks. And I really went hard to build the brick house. I didn't have fun when I was like, I'm going to make it really sturdy. And
From the get-go.
yeah, but now I'm like, okay, well, is it time to have fun yet? Like,
Yeah. I'm gonna have a party in this brick house.
that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go have a party. Well, speaking of parties, like how, you are doing a lot. You have your career, you have your motherhood, and so much more since you're building up something on your own as well and writing the book. What are some systems that you take on yourself to make sure that you're fully charged?
Um, I Well, a big practice for me is I do somatic movement. So I've been working with this practice called the class, and I've been doing that for years. I go on retreats with them. That is a huge part of my life. I try and do it every day. Try. And the other part, which I have just discovered, is I went away for the first time by myself ever in my life this summer. I'd never gone on a solo journey. And I had done traveling in my youth alone, traveled alone, but always like to a place where I was meeting people or a program or whatever, or a retreat. So I went to Greece by myself for 10 days to Paros and Antiparos, the Greek islands, and I was really nervous. It's far, far, and I was like, what am I going to do with myself? But it was the first time in my life that I felt so centered and whole and grounded. It was the first time, really. I remember the moment I was standing there. I was like, oh my God, this is what it feels like to be like in alignment with your body. All of this practice I've been doing, and they've been saying that. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't know what that means. And I really want to continue that as like a once a year. I read, I rested, I wrote, I laid at the pool all day. I had a car and I explored, and I didn't feel bad about any of it. I didn't feel bad. My husband was wonderful in holding down the fort with our youngest, and giving me the grace to take that space. So I was like, I'm taking it, and it was really transformational for me. So I try and include more rituals in practice on a regular basis, not like once a year, I'm going to wait for this thing that I do, but the somatic practice that I do, and even just the basic spending time with my friends, which is harder because I've moved into the woods again, and I don't really have any friends up here. It's really hard to make new friends. But I try to go back to the city like every 6 weeks, and then I stay for a couple of days, and I just like infuse myself with my relationships. So that's a huge part for me, is like being connected to my friends, having my own practices, and finding my own space.
And what does it feel like for you to feel like completely in alignment after that trip? Like, what did that feel like? What was different?
Um, that's the big part of me that's growing. And so much of what I share in 4050 is this feeling of, and it's not that like I don't care, I care a lot about a lot of things, but I feel like I'm able to really show up as me across the board in my family, in my relationships, and just feel less of, I've become way less of a people pleaser. I care much less about what people think about me, and I'm way less controlling. So like the people pleasing and the controlling side, where I feel like those are two sides of the same coin, and the people pleasing part of me cared so much about what other people thought of me, my family, my in-laws, my all of that, especially worried about these judgments, and realizing that I can, my friend sent this thing to me the other day that says people can only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves. And so I feel like the work that I've been doing that got me, like, it all coalesced in Greece. That's like somatic work, therapy, like a lot of personal work. Is that I feel really centered. I feel so less easy to be pushed off my axis, whereas like people could convince me I felt something different than I was actually feeling. Then it doesn't really happen anymore. I feel so grounded. I'm like, this is part of like me just becoming more of a staunch feminist too, like this whole journey of like, nope. And it's not that I don't listen and want to have context and, other people's feelings, this, and that, but I'm really able to be like, no, that's on my side of the street and that's on your side of the street. And like, it's a practice. It's a daily practice, but, that's what it kind of looks like for me, is to keep showing up for myself and say like, that's not my work, but that's my work.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Allison.
Yeah.
And let's wrap up here with just some like quick iterative responses to just random questions.
Sure. Fun.
Okay. What's your favorite hobby right now?
Um, mm, oh my gosh. My favorite hobby right now, it's probably not even a hobby. um, Okay, my favorite hobby right now, and I would say this is probably not so much of a hobby, but in my master's program, I've been thinking a lot about rewilding, and so my favorite hobby is to spend more time in nature and think about what it means to like rewild as a person, as a community in this age of machines. So I'm thinking about I'm writing a lot about that. I do a lot of project work around that, and that also requires a lot of work with my hands, which I just love.
And now my next question is one sentence about AI that you feel is true.
Mm. Maybe it's not dystopian.
I like that. One snippet of advice to mothers building something.
Oh, one snippet of advice. Don't feel bad about taking time for yourself. Honestly,
That is a really good one.
there's so much guilt that comes with taking time for yourself.
Just do it anyways, even if you feel
Do
guilty.
it anyway, if you feel, even if you feel, because trust me, I felt guilty when I left, but then I got there, I was like, I'm not guilty anymore. Like I'm bringing back the best version of me. That's what they need.
Your easiest way to recharge.
Ah, sleep.
Nice.
I love to sleep.
Sleeping is so nice.
My favorite thing, truly.
All right, and the last question I'll ask you that I ask everyone is, when did you know that you were building up something iconic? You could say your personal brand, or your book, or what you've done in your career, and maybe it was just a feeling of like that was the first time I felt great.
It's a really good question, and I have an answer that just popped into my head. Um, this is about 40-50. And 40-50, I believe, I feel as though is a culmination of so much of who I've been and who I want to be as a human. I am I don't want to be the face of 40-50. I want it to be, it's a brand that ultimately has a lot of altruistic values, and that I feel like collectively should be owned. The mutual care kind of thing. So I got a response to one of the stories that I had put out, or one of the essays that I had written, and I think it was around gathering. A woman wrote me, and she said she read the piece and it inspired her to pause and do something that she'd never done before. It was like an A-type perfectionist. She sent the piece out to a group of friends and people she didn't really know. Maybe they were neighbors, like just sort of people she wanted to know, and said, I would love for you to come over to my house. And the essay was like probably about gathering and the provocation of like, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's not, I invite you all to come to my house. It's not like, I'm not performing. I'm not going to be putting together some big meal. Bring whatever snacks. I'll have some leftover food, but I just want to talk about this piece and talk about what it means to gather and what it means to be in community. And it was so important for me to receive that and to know that the work that I had put into the world had created that beautiful moment for these women and like inspired her to do it. I felt like, oh, this is exactly what it's about, exactly what I wanted. And even if it only happens once, and it happened once, I feel like I've built something special.
It kind of, to me, wraps up a lot of what we talked about today. But ending on this note of the community, you asked me what's missing. I would say that that's actually, if I was to define what I feel like is missing that I didn't put in there, would be community. So,
Yeah.
and it's a hard one to build, especially with people being separated from each other. And that's one of the things I loved about what you were talking about, 40-50, when we met the first time. But I want to say thank you so much, Alison, for joining Building Iconic today. So many great nuggets of wisdom. And
Me.
yeah, you're welcome. We'll see you soon.
Yeah.